Advancing with watercolor again, and we're working with interiors in this demonstration. And I'd like to talk or narrate specifically how I'm using the white or lighter part of the paper to set off my subject. So the scene is I was sitting in a cafe in Boston, the Explorateur, and it's very near the theater district, and I watched as people filed in and were talking about the recent productions, sitting down, having a coffee, and it was a very animated scene. In particular, what caught my eye is the illuminated buildings that were behind the cafe that you could see through the large window, and I thought this would be an interesting experiment or an opportunity to try and put some very light areas, being the windows of the building, and placing dark figures against that. And it's an indoor-outdoor sort of scenario because the buildings are on the other side of the glass, so we have to communicate that there's a window in front as well. These first washes are kind of placed to set the lighter tones, in particular the yellow and white that's left behind the figures. I'm adding a few warm tones in the foreground of alizarin, a little bit of cad red, mixing with a cobalt blue. In the background, I've used primarily a cad yellow, left a lot of white paper, and a bit of the same cad red up above. And you can see the center of interest. The three figures here are already appearing in this underpainting. The next wash will be applied after everything's dried, and I'm using very definitive marks to create a pattern for the windows that are on the outside of the cafe. This would be the theater district, and the windows I want to impart a kind of feeling of glare or hazy lights, but I'm going to use this lower third section to highlight my figures eventually. So I create these strokes and then I break them up with verticals in order to give the sensation of windows that are illuminated at night. I wasn't quite sure how to solve the problem, but doing the painting, doing a sketch first and then a painting, gave me some clues. So I took a scene that I wasn't sure how to paint, and went about it in the way that I thought it would work. And as I moved along, I saw things that gave me clues, such as you see now some of these broken rectangles that are appearing help to create the effect of glare. So the technique, as I was painting, kind of revealed a possibility, and I try to take full advantage of that in the finished painting so that it feels almost like there's glaring lights behind the figures that are in the cafe. As I finish off this area, I'm trying not to overfinish the windows. It would be easy to paint, sills and mullions and things like this, but I want it to remain as simple as possible through the window section, through the background, and yet still give me the pattern of windows. So I work a bit on the right-hand side of the painting, which unfortunately is a little off-screen. There's about an inch that's missing. You'll see it in the finished work. But I'm building up the wall of the interior and extending that same cool gray down into the seating area and to the floor. And you notice I'm cutting around a lot of shapes here in the underpainting, leaving some exposed pinks and lighter colors. I'm painting the shapes of tabletops. That's my working idea. And in particular, you see two kind of elliptical shapes that are appearing, and maybe one in the back. These are, in essence, tabletops, and you'll see how they resolve as I put figures around them and reflections on them. But it's very much a sort of abstract pattern that I'm making, similar to the abstract pattern of windows in the background. And after this has begun to settle, I carry the same colors, which primarily are grays using ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, maybe a little bit of cad red mixed with that. And I've switched to a smaller mop brush now with a fine point that allows me to get the detail that I need. One thing I hope you'll notice and appreciate in the brushwork, I almost always hold the brush by the back, even when doing this sort of detailed work. I've found over the years that it gives me a little more freedom, ability to kind of be more calligraphic, and also a little more control. And I wasn't sure why that was the case. Eventually, I realized I was using a larger muscle to move the brush, the larger muscle being my shoulder and forearm, rather than the wrist. And if you know any athletes, they'll tell you if you can use a larger muscle, you get more strength, you get more accuracy as well. So I hold the brush by the very end, unless I'm doing something like an earring or very tiny work where I need to rest my palm, then I'll inch up. And this is a little unusual. You typically see people use the brush in this method, but does allow you to swing your arm freely, and in the long run it gives you more control. So look at how these figures are appearing against the bright lights behind. This is a use of tonal contrast to suggest my center of interest. It's also a use of hard edges against broken edges to give my main characters more presence and to come in front of the background with a strong presence. And it's this composition is pretty much set. I'm going to add some minor figures in the background, some details in the window, such as the logo for the Explorateur, some overhead lighting to make the effect a little more natural, complete, and make the effect more subtle as well. But for the moment, I'm working on the figures. While it's drying, I'm adding some lavender, which is a color made by Holbein that has a little opacity but imparts a nice, cool blue to everything, and I find that's a nice counter to the vibrant yellows that are in the background. So I'm building up the figures, adding some local colors to the near figures, which may be hard to perceive at this stage because the color is wet and it doesn't really show itself until it's dry. If you kind of measure the way it looks now with the final result, you'll be quite surprised and maybe asking, well, how do you know how it's going to dry? And I guess it's experience that tells me, well, if I just scrub in this color here, it's going to dry in the fashion that I want it to. No other real reason for that. It's you're not really painting as much by your eye as you are by faith. Kind of funny thing to say, but very true. Yes, and I'm leaving a few highlights too on the figures. You can see the ear coming out with a little prominence. The menu top, there's going to be a bridge for the nose, some glassware and a bottle on the waiter's tray. But I spend quite a bit of time while the paint is wet, building up the color, adding some stronger darks while it's wet so that as it dries, it feels very integrated. It doesn't feel fragmented at all. The postures were created pretty much by me. I think I did see a couple like this who were having an animated conversation about the theater. And the waiter is my creation because they don't have waiters like this at the Explorateur. It's kind of a self-serve place. But to carry the idea of a, after theater experience, I thought this would complement everything. And so I borrowed from my memory of figures and created this waiter carrying a tray with a glass and a bottle, which you can see clearly against that bright yellow light. And maybe even we can create some transparency in the glass later by adding a bit of dark into the middle of it. And this sort of invention is quite enjoyable. It doesn't always work out. I guess I should be clear about that. Sometimes you think you know what's going to work where, and you place it, and it looks like something you don't want there. So this is one case where it's working out to my satisfaction, and I'm pleased about that. What you see me doing now is more dry brush. Dry brush is where I have very little pigment on the brush, and in tandem with the rough paper, I'm able to generate these broken lines. These broken lines are significant in that they feel like light is kind of streaming over it, and it has an animated effect. If the line is unbroken, continuous left to right, it feels just a little static. So I make an effort to use this dry brush to generate the feeling that light is really glaring and even breaking up the bar that comes across the window. So you don't see me painting the sign part, but because the video didn't cooperate, honestly. But you can see the finished painting now with some touches and highlights, and how that background is effective to kind of portray a nighttime with lights from the buildings coming through. All this is focused on my figures, the three main figures in particular, to generate this intimate feeling of a coffee shop after having an evening in the theater. Thank you.